Guys, have you ever imagined a 90% unemployment rate for a nation like South Africa? That's actually what Rob Hersov is actually implying. And it's not like a hogwash or probably a scaremongering tactic, so to speak. But I think he has actually arrived at that number as a result of logical facts, all right? Now, I found this chart that actually speaks to the deindustrialization that's going on in South Africa. And it actually measures the percentage of manufacturing to the GDP. Remember the GDP I once spoke in my channel, that the GDP speaks to the external economy and the GNP speaks to the internal economy. How much the economy is performing within, the space in which it belongs. And so this is actually a chart that speaks to the percentage that manufacturing, all right, manufacturing speaks also to industrialization, how much manufacturing contributes to the GDP of South Africa from 1960 all the way to 2023. I remember 1960, if we calculate that 1960, this was still the time of the NP, the National Party. We hadn't gotten into an ANC majority-led government at the time of 1994 during the independence, movement by 1994. But it actually argues that as at 1960, all right, in terms of percentage contribution of manufacturing to GDP, we saw that in 1960, there was a 20% contribution of manufacturing. We know South Africa has other areas. There are sports, there's tourism. There are different aspects of South Africa's economy that contributes to the GDP that actually made South Africa a really boisterous nation, in the mid-50s and 60s, thereabout, before the call for the boycotts of apartheid from the 70s, 80s started becoming a really major thing, and the economy started tanking. But from the 60s, thereabout, we could actually argue that this was a period of a peak of South Africa's economy, right? So it says that in 1960, manufacturing was contributed 20% to the GDP, total GDP of South Africa. And that number actually has been, shaky at a time, but it never dropped below 20%. And then it peaked. It had a peak of 25% in, this is now 1985, thereabout. Somewhere just about 4, 5, 6 years before 1994, the percentage of manufacturing to GDP in South Africa peaked to 25% of GDP, manufacturing to GDP ratio, all right? But from 1985 all the way, we've seen a decline. And to the point where by 2023, that percentage peak as at 1984 has halved. All right. So we saw that in 2012, there was a 12.5% contribution of manufacturing to GDP ratio in South Africa. And by 2023, it now rests at a 12.9%. So this shows us that industrialization, South Africa has been deindustrializing over the last 10 years, over the last 2 decades, actually. There's been a decreasing effect of manufacturing as a percentage to this contribution of GDP to the nation. And we know that manufacturing has its own space whereby it provides jobs. In Ghana, for example, for those of you who do not know about Ghana's history, there was a period in Ghana's history under the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, where he pushed for a 7-year industrialization move. There was a 7-year development plan. So in other words, by 51, he had become the Minister of Government Business, although Ghana was still under the colonial machinery at the time. Ghana becomes independent in 1956, and then he becomes the president, all right? Ghana then attempts to really industrialize, but the industrialization takes off, so to speak, somewhere in 1960-61, where Kwame Nkrumah pushed that any decolonizing nation has to engage in industrialization as fast as possible, so that it can actually gain all the years, like the Holy Bible speaks about, the years that the cankerworm has eaten. All right, so Kwame Nkrumah had pushed for something he called a big push. There was a big push strategy. It was a 7-year development plan that was supposed to bring Ghana to the same power of the Soviet Union in terms of industrialization. This was a really massive period in Ghana's history. There was a Volta Dam project that was actually being financed by some players in the steel industry also from the US and all that. There were lots of investments coming from different sectors, from the east, from the west and all that, to really sponsor this Volta Dam project that provided electricity, and then the industrialization. So this was a period in Ghana. I could actually argue there was a golden moment in Ghana's history where there were lots of factories springing up, lots of, manufacturing. Ghana would produce things like sardines and all that. They were made in Ghana products during this really short time. You see, and there were lots of jobs. Because this kind of factories, this kind of manufacturing provides jobs for the people and all that. People get up, go to work. They feel that they're adding some value to their lives, and that's what really a job is. A job is kind of like, it's kind of like that opportunity for a human being to kind of like feel that they provide a value for themselves and for their families. That's what the job is. So when you take away that opportunity from a system, you are creating redundant human beings. And human beings were not created to be redundant. We, all human beings, were created to continuously strive to add value to our lives and those around us. So when you create an environment that this value isn't seen, then there's slowly a degeneration of the human psyche. All right, the human being starts to behave like an animal. All right, so that's actually what this kind of deindustrialization can actually contribute to. Now, Rob Hersov is actually arguing that with the way the deindustrialization in South Africa is actually going, we see that from 1960 all the way to 2020, we've seen a halving of that contribution of manufacturing to GDP in South Africa. That actually gone half from 1960 all the way to 2023. And the way it's going, what seems to be dominating South Africa's economy at the moment seems to be agriculture, mining, and then services. In other words, if these three areas, sectors of the economy, seem to be what is hanging there and really propping the economy, so to speak. And at the end of the day, more people are getting unemployed, more people are getting into SASA. And if care is not taken, we know that we'll be playing around 29.5 to 33.5% unemployment rate. Rob Hersov argues that if this deindustrialization process continues this way, especially with the concept of the great doubling that China and India now are providing a surplus labor that's then propped up by low tariffs and increasing, this whole import-led growth, we can see an increase in number of unemployed people in South Africa to the tune of, if possible, a 90%. According to Rob Hersov. And then we see a SASA that might be bloated and really difficult to really see how, SASA can be funded to take care of the large number of unemployed people. So South Africa's government has to really start thinking strategically on what to do about this whole unemployment rate that has the possibility of escalating beyond what it is. Let's quickly listen to how Rob Hersov breaks down the implications, especially of this ArcelorMittal that is going to be actually closing its plant in Newcastle, and they will be costing South Africa as much as 3,500 jobs. Let's listen to him break down that ramification, and I'll be back for a really interesting analysis on this whole problem.
So ArcelorMittal in South Africa has been the primary steel producer, and they're closing down their Longs plant. Long means long steel. And it's a disaster. And it's a disgraceful situation, and the government needs to take the blame. It's terribly hard doing business in this country in any case. And to have a reputable international company like ArcelorMittal pull out of this incredible business is a disaster for South Africa, a disgraceful situation for the government. And, I'm a libertarian, so I believe in small government. I believe in selling state-owned enterprises. I believe in getting rid of BEE, which is theft. The government love adding regulation, adding all these non-important issues day after day after day, which impede the free market. And when you look at South Africa from an international point of view, who in their right mind would invest here? We're deindustrializing. I think we've gone from, get this statistic wrong, but 20% of GNP down to 10%, the manufacturing industry. We're soon going to be an agricultural, mining at best, and services country, and unemployment will be 90%. And the ANC has to take full responsibility for this disaster. And Parks Tower should be tarred, feathered, and thrown out of the government. But you know what happens to ANC members? They never do get thrown out. They just could move to another job. I mean, they are absolutely useless and incompetent. Now, I could blame the GNU, But, the DA and IFP and PA have only been in power 6 months. So, and, they're putting lipstick on the pig. I think the DA needs to take over trade and industry. Parks Tower out, fire the guy, boot him out like gangsters like Becky Taylor or useless ministers like Naledi Pandor and Gwede Mantashe. And unless we do a full clean out at the top, this country is finished. We're deindustrializing, falling apart, and losing ArcelorMittal is a disaster. But if you look at the 34 ministers in our cabinet, name one that had a successful business career other than Gayton McKenzie. Gayton McKenzie was a businessman for a number of years. He understands balance sheets, income statements, cost productivity. I'm sure there are one or two in the DA that had interim business careers, but name one. I mean, Gwede Mantashe says he worked for Anglo-Vol for 7 years, and he's a communist today. So he clearly didn't learn anything on the way. It's embarrassing. They're all politicians, regulators, bureaucrats. I mean, how do you fix a country when you have people that came out of an undereducated system, still believe in leftist ideology, which doesn't work, and are our ministers? We're in a hiding to nothing. This country is going down the plug, and everybody's kids should move to America, not Europe, by the way, because Europe's a low growth, anemic, socialist hellhole.
Okay.
Everyone's kids should go to America. End of story, South Africa. I'm sick of it.
And then we just slide down ever faster. No.
It's January.
I'm saying no, Rob, no. Let's go back a little bit. This is so clear. The evidence is clear. We've now got poor old Newcastle is going to get hammered because there were drugs administered, just a little bit of drugs administered in 2015. I love that the way that you described that, Gerard. 2015, 10 years ago, give a little bit of drugs and then it needs more and it needs more and it needs more, and eventually, oh well, the drugs kill it. So first things first, stop giving drugs. But then I'll ask you, what about the motor industry? South Africa pays 30% more for vehicles than anywhere else in the world because we have a local motor industry that is subsidized by the South African population. But nobody complains. The penny there doesn't drop. Try and buy an imported motor vehicle from anyone, anywhere in the world, and you've got a 30% duty on it. So what does that say about our future in that big sector? It's almost, we're looking at ArcelorMittal, and I get your arguments, but if that's the case, there are other subsidized sectors in the country. Are you guys arguing that get rid of the motor vehicle industry and we'll buy all our cars from elsewhere in the world cheaper? But I don't know what we're going to do with all the guys who work in that sector. Just these are very complicated issues, but we do need a little bit of enlightenment to be able to move forward in a positive way there.
And keep in mind the social grants too. I mean, that's handing out drugs to the population. They become reliant on the social grant.
Yeah, not
how do we
drugs.
afford that going forward?
No, but the drugs there are very, very minimal. I mean, it's 1,300 Rand a month. That's not going to keep anyone.
Over how many people, Alec? Over how many
17 million people. But at the end of the day, a lot of them are vulnerable. They're kids. That's a whole argument on its own. Well,
why are they vulnerable? They're vulnerable because we don't have economic growth.
And they don't have parents. And we have societal issues that, well, where do they come from? Is it from apartheid? Is it from whatever? But let's just put that aside.
It's from 30 years of incompetence by the ANC. But let's get
brilliant, guys. I don't know really how else he actually could have said it. 30 years of incompetence by the ANC government. We see also this whole freedom fighter, parties. We can see Mozambique is boiling, although President Chapo has been inaugurated yesterday, and actually President Cyril Ramaphosa was blasted really hard by many, commentaries I saw on the news that, he was the only sitting president that actually attended that inauguration. The other presidents, I think in the SADC region, sent their military representatives or, their other government bodies, but President Ramaphosa seemed to have been, or if not the only one of the few sitting president that attended the inauguration of President Chapo in Mozambique amidst the protest. And I really don't know if Mozambique would attain rest, for a period of time. I'll be doing some videos by this guy who actually argued that the expatriates in Mozambique are stuck, and somehow he managed to escape and got back to South Africa. I'll be doing a video on that. But anyway, for this video, I thought that I saw a really interesting article on the Daily Maverick that actually broke down the implications of this whole deindustrialization of South Africa and the manufacturing industry in South Africa, and how that could actually, you know, impact the psyche of South Africans, but also the whole thing with unemployment and job losses going forward in South Africa. So this was a really interesting, very fantastic article by a guy called Ray Mahlaka, you know, from the Daily Maverick, that actually argued that, you know, deindustrialization has been happening at an alarming scale in South Africa, and the manufacturing industry's contribution to economic output has declined, as you could see in the chart I shared. It says that, you know, growing up, you know, as a kid in Nigeria, I remember I used to see some of these products then when I would see made in South Africa. But as a kid, I really didn't think about, you know, this kind of things. Growing up, we slowly started seeing more of made in China, made in America, made in Taiwan, especially, and all this. But the made in South Africa products actually was now sort of like that beacon of hope and pride that some products actually come from South Africa going forward and all that. But here is actually arguing that the made in South Africa or local is lekker phrases often trumpeted by the government officials. They are likely to remain platitudes. They are likely to still remain just empty words until the policymakers become serious about rebalancing South Africa's economy towards manufacturing things once again. And manufacturing is very, very important. I spoke about the short period of Kwame Nkrumah's regime before he was taken out in the military coup of February the 24th, 1966. This period was from 1961 to 1966, where he had a 7-year development plan. It was called a big push strategy. There were lots of industries, factories springing up. Ghana was producing really a beacon of hope for the decolonizing space in Africa. But after the military coup in 1966, Ghana's economy has just been tanking. So in other words, it tells us that industrialization, manufacturing is really important. There was a video yesterday by this citizen concerned lady, and she was actually blasting the Diaspora Channel News YouTube channel for always presenting a victim mindset for Africans. And that, you know, the West has actually been making Africa poor and all that. It's a really complicated case. I don't want to go into that whole debate. I may make a video analyzing some parts, because she's also right in some parts, but also not right in some parts. And the Diaspora Channel channel is right in some parts, but wrong in some parts as well. But the message clearly is the fact that manufacturing is key. Manufacturing is key to every nation. In Finland, many times when I lived in Finland, Finland actually prides itself in its production of what it needs. It might not be exporting so much as a nation of 5 million people, all right? But in terms of what it needs to construct its own roads, to clear its own trees, to you know, build its own roads and its buildings, Finland is a nation that prides itself for production of its own, you know, tools and needs to really carry out construction and all that. So when you have a majority stake in owning the tools you need, you don't have to import from China cutlasses. You don't have to import from China tractors and all that. You can produce within your state, and you see that that nation has slowly started getting on the trajectory of being really independent. But South Africa is deciding not to do that. And for me, this ArcelorMittal pulling out of South Africa is a big loss for Africa going forward, all right? So it actually says that ArcelorMittal is pulling the plug on its steel operations, and this is a devastating news. It says that the closures of ArcelorMittal, you know, will result in an estimated loss of 3,500 direct or contractor jobs in the provinces across Gauteng, Mpumalanga, and KwaZulu-Natal. And these are provinces that are actually already strained, already, are already going through a lot already. There's a battle the DA has with the provincial head there in Gauteng. KwaZulu-Natal has its own challenges with, you know, the whole problem with MK and all of that. So these are areas in South Africa that whatever avenue of industrialization that can be preserved, it's wise to preserve them, at least to keep the people busy and have some form of value creation going on in that space. But it's really unfortunate what's going on with ArcelorMittal. So it says that when ArcelorMittal's steel operation ceased to operate by the end of January, South Africa would lose an estimated 1 million tons of annual long steel production. What does long steel production mean? It says that long refers to a range of steel products used in key sectors such as rail, agriculture and mining, and it's critical in power transmission. So ArcelorMittal actually has been playing that role in contributing to the rail transport, agricultural mining. And the rail transport, I think in my video where one of you actually helped me get the right pronunciation, called Beira. Beira is a port city in Mozambique that actually seems now to be the only vital port for Zimbabwean products to get its goods by rail to the sea and export them and get the necessary goods, necessary financial returns it needs from its products. Rail, actually, South Africa actually was that portal that served by rail to serve the frontline states before 1994. The frontline states would actually use the rail service in South Africa, and this was, I think, the period where Transnet had its golden era, right? So as these guys used the rail transport in South Africa to get to the sea to export its products to the other parts of the world for trade, there were surcharges and all that. So rail transport is actually a key part of South Africa's economy, and to have an industry or a company like ArcelorMittal that actually provides the steel, actually contributes to the production of products, used for rail production and all that, is actually a big loss. It says that ArcelorMittal's decision to really end its steel production processes in South Africa, it has broader economic consequences. Now, let's think about them. What are the possible economic consequences of ArcelorMittal's departure from South Africa? It says it is more evidence of South Africa's sorry deindustrialization story, which has played out for 50 years, but has become more pronounced over the past 20 years, all right? So over the past 20 years, there seems to have been this concentration of an erosion of neoliberal values, this whole thing of a free open market. South Africa seems to be, keying into this whole idea of the great doubling, all right? So opening up its economy more to external, liberalization of its economy, allowing imports coming to replace the productive capacities of the internal economy, so to speak, and all of that. So within the past 20 years, there has been a much more concentration of deindustrialization in South Africa. It says deindustrialization happens when a country reduces or stops manufacturing things at a rapid rate, and it shifts its focus to other sectors of the economy, like business, services, retail, or technology. And these are the areas, like if you heard in Rob Hersov's argument, that these are the areas now South Africa wants to focus on: business, services, retail, agriculture, and all of that. And these areas probably might not have the capacity to provide the amount of jobs that manufacturing would provide for such a nation state like South Africa going forward. So it actually argues here that, in other words, it is when, what is deindustrialization? Deindustrialization is when investment and employment intensive industries count for less than services in the economy. Really sweet. I love that definition. Now that's for me, it's like wow. It's like having a piece of chicken. It says deindustrialization is when investment and employment intensive industries, employment intensive now, like manufacturing, like factories. These are industries that need people to really work, come to work every day. You get on the trail, you package, you do this, Although it's now being argued that those jobs will be wiped off by robots anyway. But it's actually, probably South Africa is even preparing for an AI-led future. I don't know, with this whole deindustrialization thing. But it says that deindustrialization is when investment and employment-intensive industries, they count for less. They do not matter much anymore than services in the country. And that's where South Africa is going. South Africa is now placing more emphasis on services. Rob Hersov added agriculture and mining and leaving manufacturing. And then we're seeing much more people dropping out, searching for jobs, And the challenge with this is that the more you kick out this kind of 3,500 people who have been used to this kind of jobs at the manufacturing without training them for the services in which you want to now build the new economy on, then we're causing a big disaster. There has to be a sustainable transition. I hope you guys are tracking me. There has to be a sustainable transition. So when you prepare to kick out 3,500 people into the empty job market or into the environment, and environment loaded with unemployment already, without rescaling them or reskilling them for the new industries that are supposed to replace the manufacturing, the space that manufacturing has contributed, especially in terms of its contribution to the GDP of South Africa, then we're just preparing for disaster. Simple. But anyway, it says that in South Africa's case, deindustrialization has been happening at an alarming scale. And, this is actually seen in manufacturing activity being in secular decline and contributing far less to the country's economic and employment output. All right. So now, if you remember the chart I shared in the beginning, this guy actually now breaks it down here, but I've explained it more. So he actually says that this chart now, it says that the manufacturing industry's contribution, especially as you're looking at this chart I'm showing you now, the manufacturing industry's contribution to economic output, or what they call GDP, has been halved from 25% in the 1980s to 12.9% by 2023. All right. It says that this chart now indicates that employment in the manufacturing industry has also declined from 1.8 million. So employment in manufacturing used to be 1.8 million in 2007, but now it fell to 1.6 million in 2023. All right. So that's from 1.8 million to 1.6 million in 2023. He said that's a loss of a lot of good blue-collar jobs, which has probably increased inequality and unemployment levels in the country, and actually scuppered the opportunity for people to upskill in industrial production. All right. So if we kick out these guys, are we preparing them for an AI-led future or the future of services, or are we just kicking them out to just find their way, in a frustrated space and then end up complaining that South Africa is laden with 82 murders a day and, lots of violence and gender-based violence? Because you see, most of these things we call violence, so to speak, are frustrated mind is trying to really figure out what next to do in the life that is actually already, that seems to be a frustrated place. But anyway, it says that at the peak of this deindustrialization, manufacturing made up nearly half of the UK's output. Okay, now, so this guy is actually trying to compare South Africa's case with other cases. He says that in South Africa's defense, nonetheless, the industrialization is not unique to the country, but it has been a global phenomenon, especially with what I've explained as the Great Doubling, which is the introduction of the labor surplus from the East, China, India, taking up that whole portion that manufacturing actually had been taken in the global South, so to speak. So it says that for the UK, for example, the UK got its peak, although the manufacturing made up nearly half of UK's output and employment at the peak of the United Kingdom. This would be actually probably the period of what was called the triangular trade, when the UK partook in the triangular trade, trade in slaves, and then it's actually called the triangular trade anyway, that really built up a huge portion of the UK's economy. But then it actually says that now manufacturing is actually 10% in the UK, all right? It has dropped. In the UK, manufacturing peaked 28% in the 1950s, but it has since dropped to around 10%. Even in Germany, Europe's manufacturing leader, manufacturing's contribution to output and employment fell from 25% to 19% between 1991 and 2022. All right. And now it argues that these declines have been driven by the relocation of manufacturing production from the west to the east. This is the same concept I've been telling you guys about, the Great Doubling. All right. So manufacturing production has been moved from the west to the east. That surplus labor in the east seems to be filling the gaps that should actually be provided for us, or what we will call job creation in the global south, or these other countries where manufacturing has dropped. There's a labor surplus that's now taking charge of of that. And then with reduced import, tariffs and all that, we can see much more of those production coming into places like the global south. So it says that this movement of manufacturing production from the west to east, the global economy opening up to liberalization of trade, with many countries embracing goods from China. This is actually one really major driver for the fall in manufacturing, and it's really impacting South Africa terribly. All right. So at the end of the day, these guys are actually arguing that to be able to help preserve this problem with job losses in nations, there has to be protectionist policies, as we see Donald Trump is doing. Donald Trump is actually planning to add, to implement really high tariffs so that he can protect the industries in the US. There was a really big scuffle going on between China and the US, and actually peaked as at 3 or 4 days ago, when it says that, because the US now plans to ban TikTok in the US, many Americans are flocking to a Chinese version of TikTok, so to say. But anyway, these are actually kind of like the battles or the clashes that are actually going on between the US and China. So Donald Trump understands that if he opens the US economy to much more of this great doubling, we would see an erosion of the industrial strength of the United States. The whole thing with made in US goods would actually be gone probably forever. But Donald Trump understands this, and so he has increased tariffs to many of the products that would likely be coming into the US from China and all that, so that they'll be discouraged from trying to import into the US, and then we'll see much more incentives for production within the US going forward, and then make the American people have more employment, more jobs in the US, and then a much more boisterous economy, and most importantly, a valuable people. This feeling of value is really important for the people in a nation to feel that they're providing and creating value for themselves. But when you take away that kind of space, as South Africa is doing now with this large-scale deindustrialization, a lot of people come into the street. You wake up every day, then there are no jobs, then there's no one actually is going to anywhere. You wake up, you come to the front of your house, you sit down, at the end of the day, you go back to sleep and all that. It actually has a lot of damaging effect on the psyche of the people living there. And then with the whole problem with crime rates and much more weight on SASA and all that, I'm just short of words. But anyway, I don't know. You guys share your thoughts. Let's let this debate continue. Let's have a much more robust discussion about this. What do you think about the whole deindustrialization of South Africa's economy and the future of that? Share your thoughts in the comments.